For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Sashni Madli. Author and journalist Mandy Wiener joins me today to discuss her latest book, Ministry of Crime and Underworld Explored. Welcome, Mandy.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, this is a sort of a sequel to your best-selling book, Killing Kebble. Where did your fascination for organised crime begin?
I suppose I kind of fell into it. I was reporting for EWN on radio, and I'd been reporting on breaking news, and one day I was sent to the Kebble murder, and I reported on it, and I just stayed on the case, and I just reported more and more about underworld-related incidents and crime, and I guess I started getting a reputation for that kind of field, and I just built on that. So it was a logical route to follow to do, I suppose, what is very much a sequel to Killing Kebble.
Now, early on in your book, you note a theme of despondency among those in the justice system, with many not having a very positive view on police. Just tell us a bit about this.
I found that many of the people who I was interviewing who had been worked out of the police, out of the NPA, out of SARS, they all felt very despondent about what was going on in the country at the time. And you've got to remember that over a period of the last 6 or 7 years, there's been what is effectively an evisceration of law enforcement agencies. There's been a hollowing out at SARS, at the NPA, at the Hawks, at Crime Intelligence, and the result is a lot of very skilled, very dedicated, talented people who have been left on the outside. And that's what I opened with, was the fact that there are so many of these people who are left despondent about what is going on. And it illustrates that picture of where we are at the moment.
Now, Radovan Krejcir, can you just give us some insights into his early life until he came up to South Africa?
So Radovan Krejcir arrived in South Africa in 2007 on an Interpol red notice. And he came under a pseudonym of Jules Egbert Savvy and wearing a disguise. And when he arrived, our authorities knew that he was coming, and he was arrested. And he had already earned a reputation in the Czech Republic. He had mastered the art of state capture before we really knew what state capture was. And he had been associated with a political party in the Czech Republic and funding them. And he then fled the Czech Republic while the police were raiding his villa. And he rode a bicycle out of the Czech Republic to Poland and made his way to the Middle East and then on to the Seychelles. And then again in the Seychelles, he earned a reputation as being quite politically connected, and he befriended the president and the president's son. And when it became too hot there, because he believed that the Czech authorities wanted to have him killed, he then went on a yacht to Madagascar and made his way to South Africa, where he pretty much set about building an empire here.
Now, in South Africa, what was his influence in the underworld? How far was his reach?
So what Radovan Krejcir was able to do, and to be clear, he says that he was a businessman, a family man who just wanted to live his life here. He doesn't say that he was a gangster or a crime boss. But by all accounts, he set about building an empire. So he had a lot of money. He also created a myth around himself, and that myth was of a crime boss. So he was very flashy. He had fancy cars. He bought a beautiful mansion on the Ridge on Kloof Road in Bedford View, and he started becoming quite connected with very influential business people. He befriended Lolly Jackson, Glenn Agliotti, and then he started making connections in the police, and he started building relationships with very senior police officers.
And in the book, you asked the question, what makes cops vulnerable to corruption? What answer did you get out of this?
Well, I suppose everywhere in the world, it's not just unique to South Africa that there is corruption amongst the police, but it is rife here. And the question seems to be answered largely to the degree that it's about money, that police officers are underpaid, but it's also a culture. And that has become quite systemic, that there is this culture of corruption. And that happens from the very lowest level. It comes from citizens like you and I bribing Metro police officers when we're pulled over or arrested for drunk driving or speeding or whatever it might be. And and it goes all the way to the top. And we've got a situation where the National Police Commissioner at one stage was sent to prison for corruption, and all of that trickles down.
And you say that the early onset of state capture in post-94 South Africa happened long before the Guptas, and you actually suggest that it may have started with the Kebbles. Just tell us a bit about that.
I think that what we saw with the Kebbles and Jackie Salibi was early onset state capture. We just didn't have a term for it. And you've got to remember that Jackie Salibi eventually went to prison for accepting just under 120,000 rand. And you think about that now in comparison to what we're seeing in the kind of money that's being thrown around by the Guptas. It's just astonishing. So you had a situation where the Kebbles were able to capture the police and the ANC Youth League through Glenn Agliotti. And then we saw that happen with the Guptas and then with Krejcir again. And all of that is state capture. You know, we've seen the capture of the criminal justice system by criminals. And all of that, we see the cycle repeating itself. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to write this book, is so that people are aware and they read it and they don't allow that cycle to repeat itself again.
Now, Joey Mabasa, he says that he is a straight cop and that he's never been involved in illegal activities, but he has been associated with Krejcir. What was your impression of him?
So for me, it was important that Joey Mabasa gave a version of events, because for all of these years, it's 8 years since Dolly Jackson was killed, we've never heard Joey Mabasa's version. So it was important to get that on record and to hear from him. And of course, he says that he never accepted any money from Radovan Krejcir. I don't make a determination in the book about whether or not I think he's telling the truth. Yeah. I want people to decide that for themselves. So I put the version out there, and I give the version of George Luca and Krejcir and the investigating officer, and allow the reader to make their own determination. For me, it was just interesting to actually hear from Joey Mabasa for the first time and get all of the details around his own story out in the public domain.
Now, how deep are the relationships between the underworld politicians and the cops?
What I've tried to illustrate in this book is that the nexus of these three worlds, and that is the Ministry of Crime, is the realm of the influential, powerful politicians, which overlaps with law enforcement, be it the police or crime intelligence or the Hawks or SARS or the NPA, and then law enforcement officials. And what we see time and time again is that the relationship is very deep. So in many instances, you've got a situation where known criminals are working for law enforcement. So they're paid agents, they're sources of information. So you often have informants that are paid for intelligence. And then you also have police officers who are on the payroll of organised crime syndicates. So you have a lot of overlapping, and it becomes quite opaque, that area. And then you've also got this intentional evisceration or capture of law enforcement by politicians for their own gain, and criminals capitalize off that. So all of this is kind of overlaps with one another, and that is what I call the Ministry of Crime.
Now, you met Krejcir for the first time in 2011. Tell us about that meeting and your impression of him.
So I met Krejcir before that, actually. I think I'd met him in courtrooms, and I often reported on the cases that he was involved in, but he always managed to shirk the cases. They never stuck. And then I met him at Bedford Centre in 2011. I had lunch with him, and he was incredibly charming. He was a very dynamic guy, incredibly intelligent, and anybody you speak to will tell you about how intelligent he was. He surrounded himself with the very best experts in any field, the best lawyers. He taught himself English. One person who I spoke to who knew him in the Seychelles, who worked for him, spoke about how incredibly clever he was. And he really was very dynamic and very smart, and he was very charming. He was always incredibly charming and funny as well. But he also fed into that myth that he created around himself of being this kind of don with lots of money.
Now, with Krejcir behind bars, the underworld is still very active. Who should we look out for next, and can we expect another book on this topic?
So the underworld didn't go away when Krejcir went to prison. There's still very dominant dominant kingpins and cliques in the underworld, but the difference is they don't necessarily want the publicity like Krejcir wanted the publicity. So you still have very strong Nigerian and Congolese, Chinese, Israeli, I suppose mafias is the way that you would describe it, but they don't go out there looking for the publicity. So that's still happening. And I think the interesting place to watch at the moment is Cape Town. And I cover that quite a bit in the book towards the end, in terms of what's been happening there over the last year or so, where you've got this more established group that's running security under Mark Liffman and Andre Nordier, and then you've got this new emerging group under Nafiz Modek, who used to work with Cyril Beker and Krejcir, and they're trying to take over the security at the nightclubs. So that for me is going to be the very interesting place to watch, is how that dynamic plays out.
Mandy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That was author and journalist Mandy Wiener speaking to Polity about her book, Ministry of Crime.